My brother's kids showed up at my door at 2 a.m. Their parents had locked them out again. I decided to teach him a lesson he would never forget. I'll never forget the sound that ripped me from sleep that night. A frantic, desperate pounding that slammed into my chest, making my heart race. It was 2:17 a.m. My digital clock glared the numbers like an accusation. I stumbled to the door, my mind still thick with sleep, and when I finally pulled it open, my stomach dropped straight to my feet. There they stood, my niece, Emma, 7 years old, and my nephew, Jackson, just 5. They were shivering in thin pajamas, their little faces tear-streaked and stained with dirt. "Uncle Will," Emma sobbed, clutching Jackson's hand like it was her lifeline. Daddy and Nancy locked us out again. We waited, but they never opened the door. In that instant, a cold, searing rage shot through me, mixed with a sickening wave of déjà vu from my own childhood. This wasn't just neglect. This was a cycle of abuse, and I knew, deep in my bones, that it had to end. Now, I practically scooped them up, ushering them inside, wrapping their tiny, trembling bodies in warm blankets. I made them hot chocolate, holding them close on my couch, feeling their shivers against me. This wasn't a new story. Just 2 months ago, there'd been another late-night visit, another terrified phone call. And before that, Garrett, my brother, had just dropped them off at my apartment one weekend, only to vanish for 3 days. "How long were you out there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, calm, for them. "Since after dinner," Emma whispered. Her usually bright blue eyes were shadowed with dark circles, her long blonde hair tangled. Jackson spilled his juice, and Nancy got really mad. Then they started yelling at each other. "Did you knock on the door before coming here?" I asked, dread creeping up my throat. Jackson nodded vigorously, his eyes wide. "We knocked and knocked, Uncle Will. Daddy even opened the curtain and looked at us, but he didn't open the door." My chest tightened, a vice grip. Here I was, 32, a construction manager focused on rebuilding my life after a tough divorce. I'd worked so hard to create a peaceful home for myself. Meanwhile, my older brother, Garrett, once my hero, for years my senior and seemingly perfect, had completely unraveled. After his wife, Sarah, died of breast cancer when the kids were just toddlers, he'd spiraled. Destructive relationships, erratic behavior. His second wife, Nancy, who he'd married 18 months ago, had never shown an ounce of interest in being a mother to Emma and Jackson. "All right, let's get you two cleaned up and into bed," I said gently, trying to push down the rising panic. "You can sleep in the guest room tonight." As I ran a warm bath for Jackson, he lifted his arms to remove his pajamas. I froze. Dark, angry purple bruises wrapped around his upper arm, unmistakably adult fingerprints. "Jackson, what happened to your arm, buddy?" My voice was barely a whisper. His bottom lip quivered. Nancy got mad when I spilled. She grabbed me really hard and shook me. She said, "I ruined everything." The room seemed to tilt. Rage, cold and hard, mixed with a primal protectiveness, surged through me. This wasn't just neglect anymore. This was abuse. For Jackson's sake, I held it together, gently washing his hair, helping him into clean pajamas. But inside, a storm was brewing. After tucking both children into bed, making sure they were sound asleep, I sat at my kitchen table, my hands trembling slightly. I scrolled through old texts from Garrett. Canceled plans at the last minute. Forgotten school events. The time Emma had called me, crying, because no one showed up to pick her up from her dance recital, and I'd left work early to find her sitting alone on the steps of the community center. The signs had been there for months, maybe years, but I'd convinced myself it wasn't that bad. That Garrett was struggling, that he needed support, not judgment. But now, with the chilling evidence of fingerprints bruised into my nephew's skin, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. This had to stop. I decided I would confront Garrett first thing in the morning. As his brother, I felt I owed him one chance to see what he was doing and change course. But as I finally crawled into bed around 4 a.m., I knew in my heart that protecting Emma and Jackson might mean standing against my own brother. The thought terrified me, but it also strangely strengthened me. The next morning, I called into work, citing a family emergency. After making the kids dinosaur-shaped pancakes and setting them up with cartoons, I texted Garrett. "The kids are with me. We need to talk. Coming over at noon." His response was immediate. "Thank God they're okay." Nancy and I were worried sick. The blatant lie made my jaw clench. They hadn't called. They hadn't texted. They hadn't even checked the most obvious place their children might go when locked out of their home. But I swallowed my anger, determined to keep this conversation productive. I arranged for my neighbor, Diane, to watch Emma and Jackson. At 67, she was a retired kindergarten teacher with grandkids of her own, and the kids adored her. I promised them I'd be back soon and that everything would be okay. Garrett and Nancy lived about 20 minutes from me, in a two-story house that, on the surface, looked like the perfect family home. A neatly trimmed lawn, cheerful window boxes. The irony wasn't lost on me as I knocked on the front door, the very door my niece and nephew had desperately pounded on just hours before. Nancy answered, her artificially bright smile faltering when she saw my face. "Will, the kids are okay? Garrett's in the living room. We were just about to call you." I stepped past her without a word, finding my brother slumped on the couch, beer in hand, despite the early hour. The living room screamed last night's chaos. Wine glasses on the coffee table, an overturned plant, a stain on the carpet that might have been Jackson's spilled juice. "What the hell is going on, Garrett?" I demanded, remaining standing as he lazily gestured toward an armchair. "Look, it's not what you think." He sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "The kids were acting up. We told them to play outside for a bit to cool down. And I guess we lost track of time." Lost track of time. My voice rose despite my best efforts. They were outside from dinner until 2 in the morning, in their pajamas, in 50-degree weather. "They're exaggerating," Nancy interjected, perching on the arm of the couch beside Garrett. "It was maybe 30 minutes, tops. They're always making mountains out of molehills." "Jackson has bruises on his arm," I stated flatly, watching their faces. "Fingerprint bruises." Nancy's eyes widened, then narrowed. "He bruises easily. Always has. I barely touched him." Garrett set his beer down, his posture shifting from dismissive to defensive. "Look, Will, I appreciate you looking out for them, but you don't know what it's like. They're not easy kids. Emma's got an attitude problem lately, and Jackson breaks everything he touches. They're children," I responded, struggling to keep my voice even. 7 and 5. And this isn't the first time, Garrett. The lockouts, the forgotten pickups, the times you've dumped them with me with no warning or explanation. "Oh, so now you're the perfect parent?" Garrett stood suddenly, his face flushing. "Mr. Bachelor, who's never raised a kid in his life, wants to tell me how to parent? You have no idea what we deal with day in and day out. I know you don't put bruises on children," I shot back. "I know you don't lock them outside all night. This is ridiculous." Nancy stood too, her arms crossed defensively. "We made one mistake. Parents make mistakes. But you're acting like we're monsters because you're jealous." "Jealous?" I repeated, incredulous. "Yeah, jealous," she continued, her voice taking on a cruel edge. "Your marriage failed. You live alone in that sad little apartment, and you're obsessed with our family because you don't have one of your own." I turned back to Garrett, desperate for some sign that he recognized the absurdity of this deflection. Instead, he nodded along with Nancy's words, his expression hardening. "Nancy's right," he said. "You've always been like this, Will, always thinking you know better than everyone else." "Well, I'm their father, not you." "Then act like it," I challenged, my patience completely gone. "Because right now, you're acting exactly like Dad." The comparison to our own father, who had locked us out more times than I could count during his drunken rages, hit Garrett like a physical blow. His face contorted with anger. "Get out," he spat. "Get out of my house. And if you think you're keeping my kids, think again. You keep interfering in our family, and you won't see Emma or Jackson at all. I'll make sure of it." The threat knocked the wind out of me. I hadn't expected this to go well, but I hadn't anticipated Garrett using the children as leverage. In that moment, I realized just how far gone my brother was, and how dangerous direct confrontation might be for Emma and Jackson. "I'm not trying to take your children," I said, forcing myself to de-escalate. "I'm trying to help. We're family, Garrett." "Then act like it." He threw my words back at me. "Stop undermining me with my own kids. Stop trying to make me look bad." I left their house feeling hollow and defeated. My attempt at intervention had not only failed, but had potentially made things worse. As I drove back to my apartment, my mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if Garrett and Nancy took out their anger on the children? What if they prevented me from seeing Emma and Jackson altogether? By the time I arrived home, one thing was crystal clear. Direct confrontation wasn't the answer. I needed a different approach, one that prioritized the children's safety while gathering the evidence necessary to ensure their long-term protection. This wasn't just about one night locked outside anymore. It was about breaking a cycle of abuse before it destroyed 2 innocent lives. Over the next 3 weeks, I implemented what I called Operation Safe Haven. First, I texted Garrett a carefully worded apology, not for my concerns, but for how I'd expressed them. I invited him, Nancy, and the kids for Sunday dinner, acting as though our confrontation had been a minor disagreement, not a fundamental rift. To my surprise, they accepted. During dinner, I was the perfect host, asking Nancy about her work as a real estate agent and Garrett about his recent promotion. I didn't mention the incident or my concerns, instead focusing on rebuilding the trust one would need to maintain access to Emma and Jackson. The guest room is always ready for these two, I told Garrett casually as they were leaving. Anytime you guys need a night off, just let me know. No questions asked. The relief on his face was palpable. I had just offered him exactly what he wanted. Consequence-free opportunities to pawn his children off on someone else. The thought made me sick, but I reminded myself that my goal was keeping the kids safe, not winning moral victories. After that dinner, I began preparing my apartment to be a true haven. I transformed my home office into a dedicated room for Emma and Jackson, with 2 twin beds, colorful comforters, stuffed animals, and a bookshelf filled with age-appropriate books. I stocked my kitchen with their favorite foods and my bathroom with their preferred bubble bath, toothbrushes, and character-themed towels. Meanwhile, I was quietly building a case. I scheduled a consultation with Caroline Lewis, a family law attorney with 20 years of experience in child welfare cases. Document everything, she advised during our first meeting. Dates, times, conditions of the children when they arrive, anything they say about their home situation. Take photos of any injuries, no matter how minor they seem. Keep a record of all communication with your brother and his wife. I started a detailed journal, recording every interaction. I also reached out to Emma's teacher, Miss Parker, expressing concern about Emma's recent behavioral changes without explicitly mentioning my suspicions of abuse. I asked if she had noticed anything concerning. Emma has been withdrawn lately, Miss Parker confirmed during our coffee meeting. Her grades have slipped, and she's been falling asleep in class. When I asked if everything was okay at home, she just shrugged and said she was tired. I've been worried, to be honest. I also made a point of introducing myself to the couple living next door to Garrett and Nancy under the pretense of dropping off a package that had been mistakenly delivered to my address. I struck up a conversation with Ted and Linda Baker. "Oh, you're Garrett's brother," Linda said, recognition dawning. "We've seen you picking up the kids sometimes. They're sweet children." "They are," I agreed, though I worry about them sometimes. Garrett and his wife work such long hours. Linda exchanged a look with her husband. "We worry too," she admitted quietly. "We hear a lot of shouting from their house. And more than once, we've seen the children outside at odd hours looking upset. If you ever see anything concerning," I said carefully, "would you mind giving me a call? Just as their uncle, I like to stay in the loop." They readily agreed, and I left with yet another piece of my documentation in place. The most important part of my plan, however, was establishing a direct line of communication with Emma. During one of their weekend stays at my apartment, I gave her a prepaid cell phone, showing her how to use the speed dial to reach me. "This is just for emergencies, okay?" I explained. "If you ever feel scared or unsafe, or if you and Jackson are ever alone and need help, you call me. No matter what time it is." Emma nodded solemnly, hiding the phone in the pocket of her stuffed elephant. "Is this because of what happened before, when Daddy and Nancy locked us out?" "Partially," I answered honestly. "I just want to make sure you can always reach me if you need to." "They fight a lot," she whispered, glancing toward the living room where Jackson was absorbed in a cartoon. "Nancy says mean things about Mom. She says Daddy shouldn't waste money on our college funds because we're probably too stupid for college anyway." Each revelation was another knife to my heart. But I maintained a calm exterior as I gathered information, reassuring Emma that she and Jackson were incredibly smart and could be anything they wanted. For almost a month, this careful balance continued. I had the children at least 2 weekends a month, plus occasional weeknights when Garrett and Nancy wanted to go out. During these visits, I documented concerning comments, unexplained bruises or scratches, and behavioral issues like Jackson's new habit of hiding food in his pockets for later. Then came the night that changed everything. I was working late, finishing up budget projections for a new construction project, when my phone rang. It was nearly 11:30 at night, and I didn't recognize the number. Uncle Will. Emma's terrified voice came through the speaker. We're outside again. Nancy got really mad because Jackson wet the bed. But it's raining really hard, and we're in the backyard shed. It's dark and there are spiders, and Jackson won't stop crying. I was in my car before she even finished speaking. I'm coming right now, Emma. Stay in the shed, okay? I'll be there in 20 minutes or less. Please hurry, she whimpered. The shed door doesn't close right, and we're getting wet. I broke every speed limit on the way to their house, my windshield wipers barely keeping up with the torrential downpour. When I arrived, I parked a block away and approached on foot, not wanting to alert Garrett and Nancy. I slipped through the side gate into their backyard, making my way to the dilapidated garden shed. It was empty. Panic gripped me as I called Emma's phone repeatedly, hearing nothing but voicemail. I searched the yard, growing increasingly desperate, before noticing a faint light from the covered porch of the house behind Garrett's. I circled around the block and approached cautiously. There, huddled under a patio table on a stranger's covered deck, were Emma and Jackson. They were soaked through, shivering violently. Jackson's pajama pants clearly wet from his accident. The shed started leaking really bad, Emma explained through chattering teeth. And something was making scary noises. We tried to go to the front door again, but they turned all the lights off. I wrapped them in my jacket and carried Jackson to the car, Emma trailing behind me, clutching her hidden phone. The drive back to my apartment was silent except for the occasional hiccuping sob from one of the children. As I bathed them in warm water, dressed them in dry clothes, and tucked them into their beds in my apartment, I came to a decision. Gradual documentation wasn't enough. These children needed immediate intervention. Tomorrow, I would return to Caroline Lewis and initiate emergency custody proceedings. Whatever the consequences, whatever the cost to my relationship with Garrett, I could no longer stand by while Emma and Jackson suffered. That night, as I watched them sleep, finally safe and warm, I made them a silent promise. This would be the last time they ever had to seek shelter from those who should have protected them most. The next morning, I called Caroline Lewis and scheduled an emergency appointment. After arranging for Emma and Jackson to spend the day with Diane, I drove to the attorney's office with my documentation journal, photos of the children's various injuries, and a heart full of unshakable determination. Based on what you've shared, Caroline said after reviewing my evidence, I believe we have grounds for emergency temporary custody, especially given the recurring pattern of lockouts and the documented injuries. But, Will, you need to understand something. This will not be easy, quick, or amicable. Your brother will fight back, and family court battles can get extraordinarily ugly. I understand, I replied firmly, but I can't wait any longer. What happened last night could have been so much worse. What if they'd wandered into the street looking for shelter? What if they'd been found by someone who meant them harm? Caroline nodded, her expression grave. I'll file the emergency petition today. In the meantime, I recommend installing a security camera at your front door. If the children show up again in distress, having video evidence will significantly strengthen our case. I followed her advice, installing a small, unobtrusive camera above my apartment door that would activate with motion. I also began recording my conversations with the children, with their knowledge, asking gentle questions about their home life. Does Nancy ever hit you? I asked Emma during one such conversation. She looked down at her hands. Not hit exactly. She grabs really hard. And sometimes she pinches where no one can see, like under our arms or on our legs, under our clothes. And what about your dad? I asked, my heart racing. Daddy doesn't hit us, she said, which brought momentary relief. But he doesn't stop Nancy either. He just goes in his room and closes the door when she gets mad. Sometimes he cries. These recordings, while heartbreaking, provided crucial evidence for our case. Caroline advised me not to tell Garrett about the emergency custody petition until it was filed and a hearing date was set. We want to avoid any potential retaliation against the children, she explained. 2 days later, Garrett called me himself. Can you take the kids this weekend? He asked, an unusual edge to his voice. Nancy and I need to look at some property. Sure. I agreed readily, seeing it as an opportunity to ensure the children's safety during the initial legal proceedings. I can pick them up Friday after school. Great, he said, his tone distracted. Oh, and we might need you to keep them a bit longer next week, too. Some opportunities have come up that we need to pursue. Something in his phrasing raised alarm bells. What kind of opportunities? Nothing concrete yet, he hedged. Just some possibilities. Anyway, see you Friday. After hanging up, I immediately called Ted and Linda Baker, my contacts next door to Garrett's house. Have you noticed anything unusual lately? I asked. Any indication they might be planning something? Now that you mention it, Linda said, they've been bringing a lot of boxes out to their car. I assumed they were donating things to Goodwill, but it's been happening every day this week. My stomach dropped. I called Caroline immediately. They're planning to move, I told her without preamble. I don't know where or when exactly, but they're packing things up. This changes things, Caroline said grimly. I'll file for an emergency hearing tomorrow morning. Can you bring the children directly to the courthouse at 9 a.m.? The next 48 hours passed in a blur of preparation. I gathered all my evidence, made copies of my journal entries, and prepared myself mentally for what would likely be the most difficult confrontation of my life. The thought of facing my brother in court, of publicly declaring him an unfit parent, made me physically ill. But every time my resolve wavered, I remembered Emma and Jackson huddled under a stranger's patio table in the pouring rain. Friday arrived, and I picked the children up from school as planned. I didn't tell them about the hearing scheduled for Monday morning, not wanting to frighten them unnecessarily. We spent the weekend playing board games, visiting the park, and baking cookies. Normal activities that felt surreal against the backdrop of what was coming. On Sunday evening, my parents called. This wasn't unusual. Despite moving to Arizona for retirement, they maintained regular contact. What was unusual was their tone. Will, what on earth are you doing? My mother's voice was tight with disapproval. Garrett tells us you're trying to take the children away from him. My heart sank. Garrett had discovered our plan somehow, and had already begun spinning the narrative to our parents. It's complicated, Mom, I said carefully. There are serious concerns about the children's safety. Don't be ridiculous, she scoffed. Every parent struggles sometimes. Garrett is doing his best as a single father. He's not a single father, I pointed out. He's remarried, and Nancy is a lovely woman who took on another woman's children, my mother interrupted. That's not easy, Will. Instead of criticizing, maybe you should be supporting them. I realized with a sinking feeling that my parents had already chosen sides, and it wasn't mine. Did Garrett tell you they're planning to move? Did he mention that they've been locking the children outside as punishment? That Jackson had bruises shaped like fingerprints on his arm. Children exaggerate. My father chimed in, his voice carrying the dismissive tone I remembered all too well from childhood. And children get bruises all the time. You're overreacting as usual. The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with my mother tearfully accusing me of trying to destroy the family and my father warning me that I would regret this foolishness. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence, processing this unexpected betrayal. Somehow, I had never considered that my parents might not believe me, or worse, that they might believe me but not consider the abuse serious enough to warrant intervention. That night, as I checked on Emma and Jackson, sleeping peacefully in their beds, my resolve hardened. If necessary, I would stand alone against my entire family to protect these children. They deserved nothing less. Monday morning arrived with a fresh shock. As I prepared to leave for the courthouse, my phone pinged with an email notification. It was from my bank, confirming a wire transfer. Confused, I opened the full email and felt the blood drain from my face. The children's college fund, money from their mother's life insurance policy that had been specifically designated for their education, had been emptied. All $127,000, transferred to an account I didn't recognize. Given the timing, there was only one explanation. Garrett had accessed the joint custodial account and taken everything. With hands shaking from rage and disbelief, I forwarded the email to Caroline, adding it to our growing pile of evidence. Then I woke the children, dressed them in their nicest clothes, and prepared them as gently as possible for the day ahead. We're going to talk to a judge today, I explained over breakfast. The judge is going to help us figure out the best place for you to live right now, to make sure you're always safe and taken care of. Will we have to see Nancy? Jackson asked, his small face crumpling with anxiety. She might be there, I answered honestly. But I'll be with you the whole time, and no one will hurt you. Emma, wise beyond her years, studied my face. Is Daddy going to be mad at you? Probably, I admitted. But sometimes adults have to do hard things to protect the people they love. And I love you and Jackson more than anything. She nodded solemnly, then surprised me by throwing her arms around my neck. We love you too, Uncle Will. With those words bolstering my courage, I drove us to the courthouse, prepared to fight the battle of a lifetime. Not just for custody, but for the very souls and futures of two children who deserved far better than what life had given them so far. The courthouse loomed before us, its stone facade imposing in the morning light. I held Emma and Jackson's hands as we climbed the steps, Caroline meeting us at the entrance. She knelt to introduce herself to the children, her manner warm but professional. Your uncle has arranged for a nice lady named Mrs. Rivera to stay with you while we talk to the judge, she explained. She works with the court and helps kids feel comfortable during these meetings. A gentle-looking woman in her 50s approached, introducing herself as the court-appointed child advocate. She led Emma and Jackson to a child-friendly waiting room, promising them books, games, and snacks while the adults spoke with the judge. As we entered the courtroom, I immediately spotted Garrett and Nancy in the front row, alongside their attorney, a sharp-looking man in an expensive suit. More surprising and gut-wrenching was the sight of my parents sitting directly behind them, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue while my father sat stoically beside her. Judge Eleanor Martinez, a woman in her early 60s with penetrating eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, called the emergency hearing to order. Caroline presented our petition first, methodically outlining the pattern of neglect and abuse. She showed photographs of Jackson's bruises, played brief clips from my recorded conversations with the children, and presented the security camera footage from the night they'd arrived at my apartment at 2 in the morning. Your Honor, Caroline concluded, Mr. Harris is not seeking to permanently separate these children from their father. He is seeking temporary emergency custody to ensure their immediate safety and well-being while a more thorough investigation can be conducted. Garrett's attorney, Martin Reynolds, rose next. His strategy quickly became apparent. Paint me as obsessively jealous of my brother's family, a recently divorced man with no children of his own, trying to steal my brother's kids to fill the void in my life. Mr. William Harris has no experience as a parent, Reynolds argued smoothly. He has consistently undermined Mr. and Mrs. Garrett Harris's parenting, questioning their decisions and injecting himself inappropriately into their family dynamics. The alleged lockouts were standard timeouts that the children, as children often do, have exaggerated for attention. The judge listened impassively, occasionally making notes. When Reynolds finished, she called for character witnesses. To my shock, my mother was the first to stand. Martha Harris approached the stand, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. After being sworn in, she began. Well, has always been. She hesitated, glancing apologetically in my direction. Well, he's always been the sensitive one. Ever since they were boys, he's been competitive with Garrett, always trying to prove himself. After his divorce, he became very attached to Emma and Jackson. Too attached. I think he means well, but he's never been a parent. He doesn't understand how difficult it is. Each word felt like a knife between my ribs. My own mother, who had witnessed our father's alcoholic rages, who had comforted Garrett and me after numerous lockouts during our childhood, was now defending the same behavior. My father testified next, his message similar but delivered with stern conviction rather than tears. Boys roughhouse. Kids get bruises. My son certainly did, and they turn out fine. Will's always been dramatic, making mountains out of molehills. These kids need their father, not their uncle playing parent. By the time Garrett took the stand, I felt physically ill. My brother, the person I'd looked up to for most of my life, sat with perfect posture, his expression earnest and concerned as he described my increasingly erratic behavior since my divorce. Will's always been there for the kids, and I'm grateful for that, Garrett said, his voice catching convincingly. But lately, he's been trying to replace me as their father. He calls their teachers without telling me, buys them expensive gifts, and undermines our parenting decisions. The night he's referring to, when the kids went to his apartment, they had been sent to their room as punishment for breaking a family heirloom. They snuck out their window and ran away. We were frantic looking for them. The blatant lies stunned me into silence. I gripped the edge of the table, forcing myself to maintain composure as Garrett continued weaving fiction into his testimony. Nancy testified next, presenting herself as a loving stepmother doing her best with difficult circumstances. "The children have never accepted me," she said tearfully. "They constantly compare me to their birth mother and deliberately misbehave to drive a wedge between Garrett and me. I would never harm them. Those bruises happened when Jackson was climbing a tree after being told repeatedly not to." Judge Martinez listened to all testimony without revealing her thoughts. Finally, she called me to the stand. Under Caroline's careful questioning, I detailed my observations over the past months: the repeated lockouts, the children's declining behavior and school performance, the suspicious bruises, and the patterns of neglect. I described finding them huddled on a stranger's porch in the rain and my growing fear for their safety. During cross-examination, Reynolds attempted to rattle me. "Isn't it true, Mr. Harris, that you've been struggling emotionally since your divorce? That you've become obsessed with your brother's family as a replacement for the one you failed to build?" I took a deep breath before answering. "My divorce was difficult, yes, but my concern for Emma and Jackson isn't about my personal life. It's about two children showing clear signs of abuse and neglect. This isn't about me versus my brother. It's about making sure these kids are safe." After I stepped down, Judge Martinez called a brief recess to review the evidence. The 20 minutes we waited felt like hours. Caroline squeezed my shoulder reassuringly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was fighting a losing battle. My parents' testimony had hurt our case significantly, and Garrett and Nancy had presented a united front of concerned, if imperfect, parents dealing with a meddling relative. When court resumed, Nancy was recalled to the stand for additional questioning. Judge Martinez had several pointed questions about the lockouts, pressing Nancy on inconsistencies in her earlier testimony. "Mrs. Harris," the judge said, studying a document in front of her, "you previously stated that the children were sent to their room on the night in question and that they climbed out their window. Yet the security footage clearly shows them in pajamas, with no shoes or jackets, at 2:17 in the morning. If they were in their room, as you claim, why were they dressed for bed? And why would they leave without proper clothing in 50-degree weather?" Nancy's composure began to crack. They must have changed before leaving. Children do irrational things." "Mrs. Harris," the judge continued relentlessly, "the footage also shows both children with wet hair. Can you explain that?" "I don't know," Nancy stammered. "Maybe it was raining." "Weather records show no precipitation that night," Judge Martinez noted. "Mrs. Harris, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you and Mr. Harris lock these children out of the house that night?" Nancy glanced desperately at Garrett, then at their attorney. Reynolds nodded almost imperceptibly. "It was just that once," Nancy finally said, her voice barely audible. "Garrett and I had been arguing. We'd had some drinks. The kids were being loud, and I just needed some quiet. It was only supposed to be for a few minutes, just to scare them a little." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. I saw my mother's face crumple in dismay. "And the other incidents Mr. William Harris described?" the judge pressed. Nancy's facade completely crumbled. "It wasn't dozens of times like he claims," she insisted, tears streaming down her face. "Maybe 5 or 6 times total. And never for more than an hour or two. They're always causing problems, always demanding attention. Do you know what it's like trying to be a mother to another woman's children who hate you? Who throw their dead mother in your face every chance they get?" Judge Martinez's expression remained neutral, but her voice carried an edge of steel. "Mrs. Harris, are you testifying under oath that you have, on multiple occasions, locked 2 minor children out of their home as punishment?" "Yes," Nancy whispered. "But Garrett didn't always know. Sometimes he was asleep or not entirely sober." I glanced at my brother, expecting anger at his wife's betrayal. Instead, his face showed only defeat. His shoulders slumped as the carefully constructed narrative collapsed around him. Judge Martinez called another recess, this one lasting over an hour. When we reconvened, her decision was swift and unequivocal. "Based on the evidence presented and testimony given, I am granting temporary emergency custody of Emma and Jackson Harris to their uncle, William Harris, effective immediately. Mr. and Mrs. Garrett Harris will have supervised visitation only pending a full investigation by Child Protective Services." This court will reconvene in 2 weeks to reevaluate custody arrangements based on the CPS findings. She turned her attention directly to my brother and his wife. I strongly recommend that both of you engage in parenting classes and therapy during this period. Mr. Harris, I am particularly troubled by your willingness to allow these children to be mistreated. They lost their mother. They should not have to lose their father as well. As the court adjourned, I felt no triumph, only profound relief mixed with sadness. Across the aisle, my parents sat in stunned silence, the reality of the situation finally penetrating their denial. Garrett wouldn't meet my eyes, staring fixedly at the floor as Nancy sobbed beside him. Caroline squeezed my arm. "This is just the beginning," she warned quietly. "The next 2 weeks will be crucial. We need to make sure CPS sees a stable, loving environment for the children." I nodded, determination replacing the emotional exhaustion. "They'll have that, I promise." As I left the courtroom to collect Emma and Jackson, I couldn't help wondering if my relationship with my brother could ever be repaired, or if it even should be. Today had revealed not just his failings as a parent, but a willingness to lie, manipulate, and endanger his children to protect his own interests. The brother I had idolized was gone, replaced by a stranger I barely recognized. But those were concerns for another day. Right now, 2 children needed security, consistency, and love, and I was determined to give them exactly that. The 2 weeks following the emergency hearing were simultaneously exhausting and rewarding. Emma and Jackson settled into a routine at my apartment, attending school during the day while I worked from home as much as possible. I hired a reliable babysitter for the afternoons, a graduate student named Allison, who was studying child psychology and understood the delicate situation. Both children began weekly sessions with Dr. Marissa Bennett, a child psychologist specializing in trauma. Initially hesitant, they gradually opened up under her gentle guidance. Jackson's nightmares, which had been occurring almost nightly, began to diminish in frequency and intensity. Emma, who had been carrying the weight of protecting her younger brother, slowly allowed herself to be a child again, laughing more freely and engaging in play. My parents reached out 3 days after the hearing, their initial anger replaced by confused contrition. My mother called first, her voice small and uncertain. "I didn't want to believe it," she admitted. "It was easier to think you were overreacting than to accept that Garrett could, that he would allow." She couldn't finish the sentence. "I know, Mom," I said, neither absolving nor condemning her. The complicated emotions surrounding my parents' failure to support me, and more importantly to protect their grandchildren, would take time to process. "Can we see them?" she asked hesitantly. "Not yet," I replied firmly. "They need stability right now. Let's give it some time." The CPS investigation was thorough and frankly painful for everyone involved. The caseworker, Janine Williams, interviewed me extensively about my living arrangements, work schedule, and ability to provide for 2 children long-term. She spoke privately with Emma and Jackson, examined their rooms in my apartment, and observed our interactions during everyday activities like dinner and homework time. She also investigated Garrett and Nancy's home, interviewing neighbors, including Ted and Linda Baker, who confirmed the pattern of late-night lockouts and frequent shouting. Emma's teacher provided documentation of her declining academic performance and concerning behavioral changes. Throughout this process, Garrett remained strangely distant. He attended his court-mandated parenting classes and therapy sessions, but made no attempt to contact me directly. Nancy, according to Caroline's sources, had moved out of their house temporarily, staying with a friend while reevaluating their marriage. The supervised visitations were awkward affairs conducted at the Family Services Center. Jackson clung to my leg the first time, refusing to approach his father until I gently encouraged him. Emma was polite but reserved, answering Garrett's questions with minimal responses. Nancy attended only one visit, the tension between her and Garrett palpable even to the supervision officer. 10 days after the emergency hearing, I received another email notification that rocked my world. Attempting to gather financial documentation for the upcoming custody review, I discovered that Garrett had emptied not just the children's college fund, but several other accounts connected to their inheritance from Sarah. In total, nearly $127,000, money specifically designated for the children's future, had vanished. Sick with rage and disbelief, I immediately contacted Caroline, forwarding the bank statements and transaction records. "This changes things," she said grimly. "Financial exploitation of the children's assets demonstrates a pattern of selfishness and dishonesty that directly harms their future interests." The day before our scheduled court appearance, my intercom buzzed around 8 o'clock in the evening. I checked the security camera and was shocked to see Garrett standing alone outside my building, shoulders hunched against the chilly evening air. The children were already in bed, having school the next day. After a moment's hesitation, I buzzed him up, meeting him in the hallway rather than inviting him into the apartment. My brother looked terrible, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes and clothes that hung loosely on his frame as if he'd lost weight. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice rough. We went to a coffee shop around the corner, sitting at a table far from other customers. For several minutes, Garrett just stared into his untouched coffee. "I'm sorry," he finally said, the words barely audible. "For everything. You were right. I've been a terrible father." A month ago, these words would have meant everything to me. Now, after all that had happened, they felt hollow. "Why are you here, Garrett?" He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "I want to make things right. I've been talking to my therapist. Really talking about Dad, about how I promised myself I'd never be like him, and then I became exactly like him anyway." "The money," I said flatly. "What happened to the kids' college fund?" Shame flickered across his face. "Nancy and I were planning to move to Colorado. She has a cousin there who offered me a job in his construction company. Better pay, fresh start. We were going to take the kids, of course. And their money," I pressed. "I borrowed it," he said weakly. "Just temporarily, for the down payment on a house. I was going to replace it once we sold our current house." "That wasn't your money to borrow," I said, anger rising despite my effort to remain calm. "That was Sarah's insurance money, specifically for the kids' future." "I know," he whispered, "and I'll pay it back. Every penny, I swear." I studied my brother's face, searching for the truth beneath his words. Was this genuine remorse or another manipulation? Had he come because he truly wanted to make amends, or because he knew the financial misappropriation would demolish his case in court tomorrow? "The thing is, Garrett," I said, "I don't trust you anymore. And more importantly, Emma and Jackson don't either." "Please," he begged, reaching across the table. "Tell me what to do to fix this. I can't lose my kids, well, they're all I have left of Sarah." "That's the problem," I said, a realization crystallizing as I spoke. "You see them as extensions of Sarah, or burdens from your past, or obstacles to your relationship with Nancy. But they're people, Garrett. Little people with needs and feelings and futures of their own." "I want to be better," he insisted. "I'm breaking up with Nancy. I've been sober for 10 days. I'll do whatever it takes." I wanted to believe him. Despite everything, he was still my brother, still the person who had taught me to ride a bike and defended me from bullies when we were kids. But the stakes were too high for blind faith. "Show, don't tell," I said finally. "If you're serious about changing, then prove it through actions, not promises. Complete your parenting classes. Stay in therapy. Find a way to restore the money you took. Create a safe, stable home. And most importantly, put Emma and Jackson first. Not your girlfriends, not your convenience, not your pride." Garrett nodded, wiping roughly at his eyes. "Will you tell the judge tomorrow that I'm trying, that I want to be in their lives?" I considered this carefully. "I'll tell the judge that you've expressed remorse and a desire to change, but I'll also tell her about the financial exploitation. The court will decide what's in the children's best interest." He accepted this with a resigned nod. As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, he asked quietly, "Are they okay? Really okay?" "They're getting there," I answered honestly. "Jackson's nightmares are less frequent." Emma smiled yesterday. A real smile, not the brave face she puts on for everyone else's benefit. For the first time that evening, Garrett's expression showed genuine emotion rather than self-pity. "Thank you," he said simply, "for doing what I should have done, for protecting them when I didn't." I nodded, unable to formulate a response that wouldn't sound either falsely forgiving or unnecessarily cruel. We parted ways without further conversation, Garrett walking toward his car while I returned to my apartment. Inside, I checked on the sleeping children, watching their peaceful faces in the soft glow of their night lights. Tomorrow would bring another difficult court hearing, another step in this unexpected journey. But tonight, at least, Emma and Jackson were safe, secure, and surrounded by stability. As I prepared for bed myself, I realized that the anger that had been driving me for weeks had transformed into something else, a steadfast, unwavering resolve. This wasn't about punishing Garrett anymore. It was solely about protecting Emma and Jackson, giving them the childhood they deserved. And if that meant standing against my brother in court tomorrow, then that's exactly what I would do. The courtroom felt different this time, less intimidating, more familiar. Emma and Jackson waited with Mrs. Rivera in the children's area while the adults gathered before Judge Martinez. Garrett sat with his attorney, looking tired but composed. Nancy was noticeably absent, as were my parents, who had decided to stay in Arizona after a difficult phone conversation about the misappropriated funds. Caroline had prepared me well for this hearing, explaining that Judge Martinez would review the CPS findings, consider any new evidence, and determine a longer-term custody arrangement. The emergency custody was just that, emergency, she'd explained. Now, we're looking at what serves the children's best interests going forward. Judge Martinez called the hearing to order promptly at 9 o'clock. The CPS report was entered into evidence, with Janine Williams testifying about her findings. Her assessment was clear and professional, but the content was damning for Garrett. I found significant evidence of neglect, inconsistent supervision, and emotional abuse, she stated. The children exhibit trauma responses consistent with their reported experiences. While Mr. Garrett Harris appears to be taking steps toward rehabilitation, including parenting classes and substance abuse treatment, these efforts are very recent and untested. In contrast, her evaluation of my home environment was positive. Mr. William Harris has created a stable, nurturing environment for the children. They have their own space, consistent routines, and access to appropriate therapeutic support. Both children expressed feeling safe in his care. Next came the bombshell. Caroline presented the financial records showing Garrett's misappropriation of the children's inheritance and college funds. Reynolds, Garrett's attorney, attempted to frame it as a temporary loan rather than theft, but Judge Martinez's expression made her skepticism clear. Mr. Harris, she addressed Garrett directly, are you telling this court that you took $127,000 designated for your children's future without any legal authority to do so, to purchase a house in another state? Garrett swallowed visibly. Yes, Your Honor. It was a serious error in judgment. I'm working with my bank to reverse the transfers and restore the funds. And where exactly are these funds currently? Reynolds whispered something to Garrett, who nodded before responding. Some of it was used for a deposit on a property in Colorado. I've already contacted the real estate agent to cancel the purchase. The remainder is in a joint account with my wife, from which withdrawals have been temporarily frozen by agreement with Mr. Reynolds. Judge Martinez made a note, her expression unreadable. And Mrs. Nancy Harris, is there a reason for her absence today? We are separating, Your Honor, Garrett replied, his voice strained. Nancy has decided to move to Colorado alone. She feels that her relationship with the children is too damaged to repair. This revelation sent a ripple through the courtroom. I felt a complex wave of emotions. Relief that Nancy would no longer be in a position to harm the children, concern about how this change would affect Garrett's stability, and a small, unwelcome flicker of vindication. When my turn came to testify, I spoke candidly about the children's progress over the past 2 weeks. I described their therapy sessions, their gradual relaxation into normal childhood behaviors, and my arrangements to ensure their continued care while maintaining my job responsibilities. Mr. Harris, Judge Martinez asked, if granted continued custody, how do you envision the children's relationship with their father going forward? I considered my answer carefully. Despite everything that's happened, Emma and Jackson love their father. They need him in their lives, a healthy, stable version of him. I believe that supervised visitation, transitioning to more normalized contact as Garrett demonstrates consistent positive change, would be in their best interest. Judge Martinez nodded thoughtfully. And what are your thoughts regarding Mr. Garrett Harris's recent efforts toward rehabilitation? I believe he's sincere in wanting to change, I said honestly. But I also believe that change takes time and consistent effort. The children need security now, not promises of future improvement. After all testimony was complete, Judge Martinez called a short recess to finalize her decision. Caroline squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. You've done everything right, she whispered. Whatever happens, remember that. When court resumed, Judge Martinez delivered her ruling with clear authority. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony in this case, I find that the best interests of Emma and Jackson Harris are served by placement in the primary physical custody of their uncle, William Harris, for a period of not less than 6 months. I exhaled slowly, relief washing over me. Mr. Garrett Harris will have supervised visitation twice weekly, transitioning to unsupervised day visits after 3 months, contingent upon continued participation in parenting classes, substance abuse treatment, and individual therapy. Mr. Garrett Harris is further ordered to restore all misappropriated funds to the children's accounts within 30 days, with court oversight of said accounts going forward. She turned her attention directly to me. Mr. William Harris, the court recognizes and appreciates your commitment to these children's well-being. Legal custody will be shared between you and Mr. Garrett Harris, with primary decision-making authority resting with you for this 6-month period. This arrangement will be re-evaluated at that time, with the goal of family reunification if circumstances warrant. Lastly, she addressed Garrett. Mr. Harris, this court believes in second chances and in the capacity for genuine change. Your children need their father, but they need a father who puts their welfare above all else. The next 6 months are your opportunity to demonstrate that you can be that father. I strongly encourage you to make the most of this opportunity. With a final strike of her gavel, the hearing concluded. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Garrett approached hesitantly, Reynolds at his side. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "I know they're in good hands with you." "Thank you," I replied, unsure what else to say. "I'm going to fix this, Will. All of it. The money, the drinking, everything. I want to be someone they can be proud to call Dad." I nodded, allowing myself to hope just a little that he meant it. "They'd like that. So would I." Caroline interjected gently. "We should discuss logistics for the supervised visits. Perhaps next week, when things have settled." Reynolds agreed, arranging a time for a less adversarial meeting to work out the practical details. As Garrett turned to leave, he paused. "Tell them I love them and that I'm sorry." "I will," I promised. And I meant it, despite everything. After collecting Emma and Jackson, who responded to the news of the arrangement with cautious relief rather than jubilation, we returned to my apartment, our apartment now. As they played in their room, I sat at the kitchen table, the emotional weight of the past weeks finally hitting me all at once. I had become essentially a single parent to 2 traumatized children. My relationship with my brother would never be the same. My parents were caught in a painful middle ground between their sons. And yet, looking toward the children's bedroom, hearing their quiet laughter, I knew with absolute certainty that it had all been worth it. 1 year later, Emma and Jackson celebrated their 8th and 6th birthdays with a joint party in the backyard of our new house, a modest 3-bedroom with a fenced yard and a treehouse I'd built myself. Garrett was there, 6 months sober and actively engaged in their lives. He'd moved to a smaller apartment 10 minutes away, found a steady job in construction management, and never missed a therapy appointment or visitation. The children's college funds had been fully restored, with additional contributions from Garrett's salary each month. Emma's grades had returned to their previous excellence, and Jackson's anxiety had diminished to typical childhood levels. They still saw Dr. Bennett monthly, but now the sessions focused more on building resilience than processing trauma. After the party, as the last guests departed and the children played with their new toys, Garrett lingered, helping me clean up the scattered wrapping paper and cake plates. "Thank you," he said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence between us. "For what?" I joked. "You did most of the cleanup." "For not giving up on me," he said seriously. "For giving me the chance to be their father again. For breaking the cycle." I thought about our own childhood, about our father who had never acknowledged his failures or sought to change them. About how easily Garrett might have continued that pattern if not for the intervention that forced him to confront his behavior. "Sometimes," I said slowly, "the most loving thing you can do is hold someone accountable." It would have been easier to look the other way, to make excuses, but Emma and Jackson deserve better. And so did you. Garrett nodded, understanding the deeper truth in my words. We had all deserved better as children, better protection, better examples, better tools for dealing with our own emotions. By refusing to perpetuate the cycle of neglect and silence, we had finally begun to heal, not just the current generation, but perhaps the wounds of our own childhood as well. As the sun set on that ordinary Sunday, casting a golden glow over the backyard where two children played without fear or uncertainty. I realized that family isn't just about blood or shared history. It's about choices. The daily, sometimes difficult choice to protect, to nurture, to hold accountable, and ultimately, to love in ways that elevate rather than diminish. In saving Emma and Jackson, I had found a deeper understanding of what family could and should be, breaking a generational cycle and building something stronger in its place. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect someone you love? Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that truly matter most. If this story touched you, please like and comment below. Thank you for listening. And remember, breaking cycles of hurt takes courage, but the healing it brings is worth every difficult step.